and welcome to Spotlight on the Arts. I'm Karen Stevens, and I'm your host for this segment. We're calling our show, Let's Get Critical. But before we get into that, let's meet our panel. Miss Iris Acker, actress, writer, and the producer of Spotlight on the Arts. And sitting in for our usual panelist today, Michael McKeever, is Mr. Andy Rogo, who is the artistic director for Island City Stage and winner of many awards. And finally, Jeffrey Bruce, an actor, vocalist, and director who is sitting in for our panelist, Bill Hirschman. And the reason he's sitting in for Bill is because Bill is on the hot seat today. So, Bill has many credits to his name, but we know him mostly as a theater critic and chief editor of FloridaTheaterOnStage.com. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Tell us, how does it feel to finally be in the hot seat?
Hot, uncomfortable. I like asking the questions, not answering the questions. But I'll try. Go ahead.
Okay. So let's just dive right in.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Let's dive in.
As a chief theater critic, but I want to ask you some background on your writing.
Ask me anything.
First. But first of all, can you tell us what is the biggest misconception about being a critic?
I think the biggest misconception is that critics don't like what it is that they're reviewing, meaning the art form. There are people who think that theater critics are theater critics because they don't like theater or they hate theater. The same can be said about movies or any other art form, that the critic is really trying to get their revenge out. It's, in fact, exactly the opposite. Theater critics and most critics love the art form that they're reviewing. For one thing, they spend an immense amount of time with it, and it would be pretty sadistic to themselves to be spending time around something that they don't like. And we always go into a show with an open mind. We may have preconceptions, which we put in a little box and leave at home. But in fact, we go in with an open mind and we hope. We are dying for whatever it is, community theater, high school theater, it doesn't matter. We are hoping to have a good time and be entertained. And I think that actually surprises some people.
So is it something that you rolled into? Was it your dream to one day write as a critic for the theater?
Actually, no. I've always been involved in theater my entire life. Since I was a little kid, I was simultaneously involved in theater and journalism at the exact same time. When I went to the University of Missouri, I was a journalism major, but I minored in theater. The two most jealous professions I can imagine. The theater people wanted to know why I was wasting all that time in the newsroom, and the newsroom people couldn't understand why I was wasting all that time in the green room. And I've both performed and directed and written on and off much of my professional career. But I actually never thought I'd be a theater critic. And when I got here in '94, I was actually, among other things, because I'm a hard news reporter, an investigative reporter, and government reporter, and crime reporter, I was also a book critic, and I had been for many years. And about 2 or 3 years in, the second string critic for the Sun Sentinel, where I was working, basically got burned out. He had done it many, many years. And they asked, did I want to do it? And I said, oh yeah, please throw me in that, please throw me in that swamp. And I helped out Jack Zink. And when Jack got sick, I did more and more of it until he passed away. And then I was freelancing it all the same time. So I love theater, and I've been involved in theater on a ground level most of my life.
Something that I always wondered about was, especially in the New York Times, you would read art reviews. And I would think to myself, who is this person who's telling me that art is good, that this particular painting is good? What qualifies that person to speak for me? And when I was studying drama when I was a kid, Sandy Meisner, who was my teacher, said something that I'll never forget. He said, the toughest thing in the world is to be objective about a subjective situation.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering how you go into a show and you sit there and you think, I'm not crazy about it, but I think the public will love it. What do you think are the good qualifications for a drama critic? And an art critic.
And an art critic, and any other critic.
Yeah.
I think it really helps to have some idea of how the process works. And I think you don't have to, but I think the best critics actually know how your sausage is made. And they know what the difficulties were in actually creating that. Now, the flip side of that is that most of your audience doesn't know. And you also have to look at it from the perspective of somebody who comes in cold. For instance, in a new work, I will often get a copy of the script in advance so that I can quote from it. But I don't read it in advance because I want it to hit me as cold as anyone else. I don't want to know what's coming.
So you read it afterwards?
Yeah, I'll look at it afterwards so that I can quote dialogue and particularly interesting plot points or something I may have missed something. And I'll go back and look at it. But what qualifies you to be a critic? I'm not being funny. It's a very alchemical process that's very difficult. But you said something really interesting that I just loved.
I did?
Yes, you did. Says the critic.
What's today?
Says the critic. There is a theater that shall remain nameless that for many years I would go and I would review it and say, this is not my cup of tea. This is not something I'd spend my money on. But they are doing it either A, very well for people who do like that type of material, or B, if you like that type of material, they're not doing it very well.
Bill, you've ended your critiques many times saying, but the audience loved it.
Right, and I think that's a fair observation because I'm one opinion. Now, I will grant that I think I have a very educated, trained opinion, but you can take any 3 or 4 critics and have them go to the same show and see a completely different show, not to mention different audience members. There used to be a terrific website called stagegrade.com about New York theater, and I hated that they actually put letter grades on it. But what was fascinating is they would aggregate every major New York area critic's review on the same show.
Right.
And you would read 5, 10, 15 reviews, and you'd think they'd all been at the different shows.
They do that with films now on television.
And these
Rotten
are
Tomatoes
all,
does that.
Yeah. And these are all talented people. These aren't fly-by-night people. So I approach everything with the understanding that I'm just one opinion. And Judith Christer used to be a film reviewer, would be the first to tell you, was the first to tell you, that you don't necessarily go and take what the critic says as gospel. You over time learn that this is what your taste is as compared to that critic's taste.
But saying that, Bill, then is it important to say, well, the audience loved it? Is that then your job? Because if I'm trying to, as the reader, connect with you and I say, okay, I trust Bill 80% of the time, so I just want your opinion, rather than you glossing over or saying, well, the audience seemed to like it. Is that important then?
Yeah, I think you get both. I think you get both. I think the idea is, space permitting, that you give both. This is what I thought of it. This is what other people around me seem to react to it. Goethe, the German playwright, who also was a critic for a while.
Is he in town?
Yeah, but he's moldering.
Okay.
He said there were 3 things a critic should do. The first is figure out what the playwright was trying to do. B, assess how well the playwright achieved what the playwright was trying to do. And then only if you have a little bit of time afterwards, what you thought of what the playwright was trying to do. And to some degree, I think he's right if you hit all 3. So I think people do respect certain critics' opinion, and you need to give them that as well.
Also, I'm always thinking you're not always kind to an actor.
No.
No. And it's a small town. This is a small town. And that actor has to live with it, and so do you.
Right.
And that's why I would never, ever, ever be a reviewer. I couldn't bear that. Doing that as another actor.
But I'm a journalist. I mean, I really take this seriously. I'm an old newspaper journalist. I used to cover crime and write nasty stories about police brutality. I've covered county commission. I've covered graft in the Defense Department. I'm used to everybody not loving you. Now, I want everybody to love me. I really do. And it's a failing. And sometimes I have to watch whether I'm being too nice, because the other thing is I'm not working for any of you guys. I love you all, but I don't work for you. I work for the people who are reading me and who want to know whether this is worthwhile or not.
But on that note, because this has been a bugaboo of mine for a long time.
Bug away.
Because of the theaters closing in South Florida, do you think that more than a few times that critics will give a pass to a theater production and err on the side of positivity, and then an audience member will read the review and think, well, you know, he or she said this is a really good show, and they're sitting there and they're thinking, I want to blow my brains out because this is the worst thing I've ever seen.
I love your questions. No, that's a perfect question, and here's the answer.
We've all been through it.
I don't knowingly do that. I may do it unconsciously on occasion. I do not intentionally do that, and this is why. The only, outside of my brilliance and in writing and my wonderful taste,
well, you gave me a very good review.
Of course,
thank you very much.
The only thing that I have, is the integrity of my reputation. And if somebody goes to too many shows based on my say-so, and they go, what show was he watching? And not just it's a difference in taste, but he was obviously being way too nice to these people, and that's 2 hours I will never get back in my life. If that happens too often, then I'm shot. That is literally the only asset I've got, and I guard it jealously. Now, I am always worried when, we have such great theater down here, and we do.
Thank you for saying
it's
so.
It's true.
Absolutely.
There's some mediocre stuff and there's some rotten stuff. But generally, there is so much good theater that I can end up writing 4, 5, 6 positive to glowing reviews in a row. And I get very nervous sometimes that I'm being too nice or I've lowered my standards. And it turns out, and I have people who I check with and say, am I being too bloody nice? And no, we just have some really good work over and over and over.
How do you handle, I'm sorry, Andy, how do you handle the aforementioned, some of the rotten stuff that for some God knows what reason gets recommended by a Carbonell nominator, that you have to go see and you have to sit through this? How do you handle that in a review?
Well, usually my reviews usually come out before.
The seats were very comfortable.
Yes, the seats were comfortable.
I remember that one. Yes, you were not.
My reviews come out usually before we know whether a piece is Carbonell recommended or not. So that, first of all, never influences me. I'm usually done long before we find out whether. I should point out, I'm a Carbonell judge, and if it gets recommended, I have to go, even if I've had a freelancer see it. And there's been a few shows that I've thought, well, there are 2 hours I'll never get back in my life. But
just a few?
Very few, very few. But I agree. It really doesn't intersect. Even when I read somebody else's review who disagreed completely with mine, I'm just very cool with the fact that people have different opinions and different reactions, 80% of which are perfectly valid, because we all come to any piece with different backgrounds, different baggage, different, I got thrown out of the house by my spouse today, I just won the lottery. It all goes into the mix, and in the words of that great 14th century theologian Sylvester Stewart, different folks, different strokes for different folks.
Is he in town?
He's dead too. Well, he's not dead yet.
Bill, I wanted to ask you, since you started Florida Theater, Florida on Stage, your reviews get to be, you don't have an editor anymore, so you get to write much longer reviews and critiques. And I'm wondering, though, I mean, that's really a luxury.
It sure is.
And does it make you approach what you're going to say differently than if you were limited to, you only had 3 paragraphs, so that's what your editor said you had to do?
Absolutely.
And so when you were writing more for newspapers, what did you try to focus on differently?
That's a good question.
Wow, that is a good question. It's a concision. I'm a lot more loose now about reviewing technical aspects and making sure that people in the chorus who have done a really nice job get their name mentioned, not because I'm local, but because I have the space to do it. If I was working for the New York Times, or if I was working for somebody who only gave me 6 inches, same thing. I would want to do that, but I don't have the space. As anyone who knows me can tell you, concision and brevity is not my strength to begin with.
For sure.
And as I have editors who started out with beautiful brunette hair before I met them, and I'm a challenge. And one of the glories, seriously, one of the glories of so much criticism going online is the ability to say more than you can in print, which is now shrinking more and more and more.
Let's take it from the other side, from the reader. I sit there sometimes reading, I will say, pick it up, pick it up. You know, get to the review.
Yeah.
You
right.
know,
and you're right. You are absolutely right.
Yes, I
and
am
in
right.
fact, I know you. Well, you're usually right. And I have other colleagues in the country that are critics that are mostly working online. And in fact, we all are learning that we have to, that just because you can go on forever doesn't mean you should go on
Yes.
forever. And I'm always learning and I'm always changing, and I am trying more and more these days to be a little bit terser.
Work on it.
And yes, I need to work on it a lot more.
I'm in that same vein, you know, I've always found it remarkable that you can reference the things that you talk about in your critiques, which speaks to your knowledge of theater and your knowledge of literature. And actually reading one of your reviews is like reading literature. It is.
Oh.
I mean, that's a compliment. And, you know, like it's been said, it's, you know, very lengthy and
Different chapters.
but your use of language it's really beautiful, you know.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to tell you that, and they are long. But,
Very true.
but that one, I wanted to, in that vein, I wanted to ask you questions about your training in writing. We can get back to the, you know, the critique thing. Just, you know, I just want to take a little detour about your training as a writer, and how did you come to know you were a good writer or had the potential to be a good writer, or how did you become such a good writer? And I know that to be a good writer, you have to read a lot. You know,
Oh, yeah.
you have to be very studied. But can you just give us a little bit?
It's hard that until the last few years, I haven't had a lot of confidence in my writing. I've known it's been competent, but most of my writing training is as a hard news journalist, murders and city council meetings and that sort of thing, and issues and investigative reporting, which is a much different kind of writing. It was only when I was writing as a book critic that I learned how to write something that people would want to read that had a little bit of entertainment value. If you're going to write as long as I do, hopefully you're going to find ways to make it enjoyable. But I really, you know, I read other people, particularly other critics, and look at what they're doing and try to learn from that even at this late date. I love reading Christine Dolan. I learn a lot from her. I know these guys aren't popular, but the two guys for the New York Times, Ben Brantley and Christopher Charles Isherwood, the way they write, whatever else you think of, and the way they write is very instructive. And I keep looking at them. Instructive on how, not just to write, but how to see, as we say in Sunday in the Park with George, how to see what's going on and what's to be observed. The best writing is not general. I do a little bit of teaching. And what little I do when I'm talking to people is never tell me a play is good or a play is bad or you thought they gave a great performance. It's the specificity and the ability to give examples. I take more notes than almost any critic I know. And it's because I'm desperately trying to find examples that illustrate what it is that I'm feeling or seeing or why. And it's a real struggle, but it's...
Tell me
something
about the
I'm learning.
American Theater Critic Association.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
I know
you.
you want. Tell me.
Thank you. I didn't even pay her to say that.
He did.
I am chairman of the American Theater Critics Association.
Nice.
We are the largest and only cross-venue theater critics group in the country. We've been around many, many, many years, and many of the greatest critics in American theater have been members at one point or another. We now are trying to navigate this changing world in which newsprint coverage of the arts is shrinking, where theater critics are doing lots of other different things in addition, and where much of the profession is going online. And our organization is trying to act as an advocacy organization. When we see critics across the country acting in what we think is an unethical manner, we actually have released press releases. There was the guy up in Los Angeles a few months ago who basically was selling his criticism or putting out a situation where if you'll take out an ad, we'll give you a review.
Oh my
We
goodness.
stepped and we made a big stink about it. And then there was this whole situation where with out in Los Angeles with not the Mamet play. What's the matter with me? The play where the playwright did not the Pinter, the Harold Pinter, where
Pinter.
the estate didn't want the show reviewed. And we stood up and said, you can tell the theater whatever you want, and the theater can deny us free tickets, because free tickets is a gift that we get. It is not expected. But if we want to pay our money just like anybody else and come in and review it, then by golly, we're going to do it. And we stood up and made a big stink about this in the news media and that sort of thing. It's the kind of thing we do, a lot of professional development work, trying to get people to be better. That sort of thing.
Where do you think that criticism is going to go as the newspapers start to let go their theater critics? Are theater goers actually looking online? Where's that going to go?
Have
do
you got
think?
a dart that we can throw at the board? We don't, seriously, nobody knows for sure. It is clear that the trend is that the general mainstream print media thinks less and less about giving sufficient coverage to the arts. They cut back on the amount of space, the amount of time, the number of things that they cover. They furlough their writers and then hire them back as freelancers, which saves them money. But, and I'm obviously biased here, but I do believe that online arts journalism, not your 16-year-old who has a blog that he put together, but arts journalism has a real future online. But it's a matter of letting people, first of all, know that you're there. You know, you can have the secret of life, but if nobody knows it's there, it doesn't help. So I do believe that niche publishing or niche topic coverage is the future of a lot of general journalism, but particularly arts journalism. And I think my operation and the half a dozen others like mine around the country are the future. But we're still feeling our way around in the dark. We are quite successful. So we surprise ourselves with how successful we are. We didn't know it was going to do this well. But and we're very proud, inordinately proud. But we're pioneers. We're trying to figure out the answer. But the reaction of the theatrical community, which has been very supportive, and including advertising, and the support of patrons who find us, which is the key phrase there, has been incredibly encouraging. So I think it's a matter of making people know that we exist and that we are what you used to do when you went to the newspaper.
I think the challenge is the patrons, because I notice, as a producer, that if we get a very positive review in the Herald or the Sun Sentinel, there's a little spike in ticket sales when it's in print, not when it goes online, because it usually goes online first. But it's not until it's printed in the paper that we see that difference. And I think that's partly because in the paper you can come upon it, whereas online you have to look for it.
I think that's very true.
Well,
But with respect, The other thing is, and I mean this with respect, the layout of most newspapers online these days make it very difficult to find things. And, you know, as I'm always telling people, you go to a newspaper and 98% of the people who are reading it don't care about theater. You go to my website and 100% of the people there care about it. But I think you put your finger on it. We believe we have great penetration in the community, theater community. Our challenge is how to reach patrons. And we're doing it. It's growing all the time. We've got huge numbers, but we're not anywhere near where we need to, and we're trying to figure out, that's the challenge you're talking about where are we going.
With what you just said and what Andy just said, the age-old question in South Florida is, how do you get new people into the theater? How do you fill the seats? And without the criticism that a kid can see in college or something, where are they going to do it? Because, I mean, with all due respect,
that's fine.
I mean, of course, we all read your column, but we're theater people.
Right.
To get those outsiders, where is the next generation of theater goer going to come from?
It's marketing, but I think also...
You have 1 minute to answer that question.
I got less than that. I got 10 seconds. The schools. We print the reviews of the CAPI program, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students out there. And I know Karen needs to...
Yeah, social media. Social media is where the young people find all of their information.
Right.
Yes, social
And we're
media.
very big on social media.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Bill.
My pleasure.
You were great, as usual.
Great job.
Thank you for joining us for this segment of Spotlight on the Arts. Thanks to our panel. Thanks to our sit-ins today, Mr. Jeffrey Bruce and Andy Rogo. And thank you for joining us. We appreciate you tuning in every week. We'd like you to patronize the theater. And if you'd like to know what's going on, go to floridatheateronstage.com. And please keep joining us here at Spotlight on the Arts. We'll see you next week.